After my analysis of irrationality, I will begin building a self-consistent framework of rational morality from first principles. The concepts and theories I will share today are understandably difficult to conceptualize, being that they are highly interdisciplinary as well as potentially polarizing. Some sections may be more or less accessible depending on one's specializations. We can explain important human shortcomings across vastly separated areas of concern. For instance, why ecological urbanism has never been successfully implemented, and why object-oriented programming continues to be preferred over mathematically rigorous functional programming paradigms. What is perhaps most interesting about human irrationality is that irrationality is not inevitable. Those with the will and capacity to rigorously reason may do so freely and at length. The social, cultural, and physical dominance of irrationality is not the inevitable outcome of intellectual practice, even if it is overwhelmingly the commonest. Human beings will tend to, mostly subconsciously, adhere to social norms like object-oriented programming or car-centric urban zoning as a matter of immediate survival and acceptance within their tribes. Naturally, the dominance of such paradigms don't make them rational in principle, any more than the ubiquity of fast food makes fast food superior to fine dining. Anti-ecological urban design is destroying the planetary ecology at a shocking rate. This ecological destruction is causing problems like severe weather events, as well as farming and health issues in the current population's lifetimes. Unlike in the early days of environmental activism, we're dealing with the consequences now. We can measure the changes and stipulate the dangers in very real terms and in very real time. Even the human beings who benefit the most from these various ecologically destructive systems are doing so in fundamentally irrational ways. For a start, they are surrounded by immiseration and poverty, even if they don't have to see it or interact with it directly very often. Wealthy people don't breathe different atmospheric gases than the rest of the population. They necessarily live in the same planetary context everybody else does. Even in the clearest cut case of individual benefit from these urban systems, irrationality is plainly there. Everybody is breathing in exhaust gas pollution, which increases in volume and concentration constantly. The idea that anybody is going to escape permanently into outer space is also irrational. This is the case because nobody has spent enough time to actually fully understand and replicate our planetary ecology, as in practical CELSS, closed ecological life support systems. People may insinuate that these capacities exist or will exist in the near future, but the evidence tells a different story. Efforts like Biosphere 2 in Arizona are largely dismissed and lack funding, despite the logically obvious need to realize such systems in order to live in outer space permanently. Even if the financial capital to fund such experiments exists in principle, it is not being deployed for those purposes. The usage of object-oriented programming and the highly class-oriented design of much of software belies fundamental irrationality. Most organizations don't try to actually analytically compare similar implementations in object-oriented versus functional paradigms. Teams merely assume and parrot the superiority of design implementations without much in the way of evidence. Many conventional defenses of object-oriented strategy are largely thoughtless manifestations of tribalism, like object-oriented programming is more maintainable. These tribalistic anti-patterns are common enough in, for instance, LLM training data that we can rather easily coax LLMs to provide them as knee-jerk defenses after being critical of OOP in prompts, despite the fact that rigorous studies actually proving the maintainability of OOP over functional programming do not exist. Functional programming can be fully described by the lambda calculus, which formalizes the functional paradigm beyond what OOP could ever claim, even in principle. Considering that programming is ultimately constructive mathematics and functional programming is demonstrably capable of producing idempotent programs with less code and at greater speed than OOP, the argument for functional programming couldn't be easier. Additionally, functional programs can be trivially deterministic, while object-oriented programs often struggle with stochasticity. The persistence of OOP despite superior alternatives illustrates how even highly trained technical minds default to tribal consensus over rigorous analysis, particularly when that consensus is embedded in tooling, curricula, and professional identity. Human activity has been to date fundamentally irrational, and the results of this are demonstrable across diverse areas of activity, from urban planning to software. A very small number of people possess the level of intelligence, analytical capability, soundness of mind, and self-control to actually reify something approaching true rationality. Rationality that extends beyond some immediately obvious time period like a business quarter. This extremely small percentage of the population is largely ignored by society. They are also taken advantage of when it behooves the system, for instance in the creation of new technologies. This small group's efforts, when manifested purposefully by them as meaningful solutions to wider social problems like producing ecological food systems, are ignored or suppressed irrationally by the wider system of irrational actors. A good example of this is Paulo Soleri and his otherwise very promising capitulation of arcology. Despite having the time, the resources, the funding, and the personnel, no major institution, academic or otherwise, has had the wherewithal or even desire to take up Soleri's research and design work, despite the totally obvious benefits and even social necessity of that work. Arcology has never been disproven. Arcology, particularly when considering my continuing work on it, is rigorous. At this point, it would be trivial to begin describing the extensive set of irrational activity found throughout human history. What we consider society may be said to have come directly as a result of agriculture. However, history itself is a series of wars. History is the establishment of borders, and the way cultures have defined their internal, external, psychosocial boundaries. Never has a historical culture defined itself by its capacity to fully comprehend and manifest a planetary ecology. The capacity to reason, self-awareness, sentience is perhaps not necessary for a planetary ecology to emerge in principle. Rather, the hydrological cycle, solar radiation, incomprehensibly vast spans of time, and particular combinations of elemental products make for the potential of life. Proteins, cell walls, metabolism emerge and self-replicate. Complexification follows, allowing biological forms to appear to defy entropy as they increase in structural, metabolic capability. Organisms persist over vast spans of time, sustaining the production of gases such as oxygen through cellular metabolism. Organisms form vast webs of interdependence, leading to increasing organic potentials which allow the emergence of ever more complex forms of life. Ecology is manifested through sheer chance over vast spans of time, Given the presence of elemental variation in the right amounts, the protection from outer space by a particular gravity well, the evolution of life, and the gaseous atmosphere which comes with it. The capacity to reason, sentience, is perhaps necessary to greatly accelerate this incredible process of ecological formation, such that it may take place within the span of a human lifetime. We are gifted with the existence of a planetary ecology, its many domains already teeming with life and complexity, ready for us to begin understanding and replicating. The first dimension of my formulation of a rational morality from first principles involves the recognition of ecology as the underlying support framework of human life. We may formulate all other moral systems from that point. The existence of our ecology is not something we can take for granted if we are to be rational beings. Our ecology is the foundation life itself rests upon, responsible for our creation, literally giving us breath, sustaining our children. Understanding our ecology is epistemologically and philosophically necessary for any correct moral formulation. Ecology is the self-evident basis of a rational morality, literally teeming with observable facts and mysteries, waiting to be discovered and understood. Therefore, the continuation of our ecology is our highest principle of concern. Although we may not fully understand our ecology, our understanding may be continuously improved upon. That which we do understand about our ecology may be used to inform any society-level activities we undertake. An ecologically informed precautionary principle is a pragmatic one as well, in that any large-scale activity which carries with it the potential for ecological destruction must be selected against. Any large-scale activity which carries with it no known ecological harms can be preferred over ones that do. We are perhaps intellectually lucky that most major fundamental ecological changes, such as the global composition of atmospheric gases, naturally take place over extremely long spans of time. We are not required mentally to deal with ontological issues involving trillions of ecological variables which must be weighed against millions of outcomes to inform choices occurring in days or hours. The existential risk of various choices at this point can still be reduced to simply mitigation. Our planetary ecology is naturally self-sustaining as well as self-correcting without our presence or interventions. Our newly historically enormous population size is certainly something to consider, but it is not highly correlated with fundamental ecological sustainability in terms of, for instance, elemental compositions in principle. We should, rationally speaking, reduce or eliminate our output of ecologically unnatural gases such as vehicle exhaust emissions, and luckily the proof of this is intellectually trivial, at least for our sake. The same can be said for many historically new pollutant outputs of society, such as vehicle tires or other forms of chemical waste being dumped into ecosystems. The localization of agricultural production is an obvious next step towards a realization of ecological urbanism. Even before we begin to fully understand and replicate true closed ecosystems, we may at least move a standard set of agricultural products towards the population centers they are consumed by. This localization has intellectually straightforward benefits. The reduction or elimination of unnatural gases being released into the atmosphere, the reduction or elimination of various destructive forms of production such as vehicles themselves. As virtually all modern urban populations continue partaking in their objectively reckless, consumption-based, irrational lifestyles, new communities of rationally moral individuals may begin prototyping next generation urban systems outside of these existing urban centers. By nature of limited remaining space and the consideration of existential and ecological risk mitigation, these new prototypes must conform to rather constrained study postures. In terms of what these arcological prototypes should study, a minimal diet composed of intentionally selected agricultural products known to be viable for that particular environment or greenhouse assemblage space is probably most important. Along with agriculture, the design of the architectural assemblage should be given due consideration. What distinguishes arcology from merely an advanced intentional community or farming outpost is its architecture. That is inherent in the definition of arcology, the portmanteau of architecture plus ecology. In practice, arcology is meant to normalize a kind of collectively shared beauty in common spaces. An arcological prototype should possess a shared cafe space. The cafe should consist of a multi-level and highly integrated urban structure which is aesthetically beautiful, practical, and built to last as long as possible. These three design elements, beauty, practicality, and longevity, are extremely important to make any given prototype a true arcology. A prototype arcology should be a structural assemblage which the community is proud to live in and contribute to. Although these aesthetic and architectural considerations are subtle and complex by nature, as well as in part defined by taste, they are no less important than the agricultural components of the arcology. If the community is not satisfied aesthetically by their most important living spaces, they will, over time, be too tempted by irrational will to abandon the assemblage, and the failure of the community and the arcology itself will inevitably occur. Even when we have achieved the capability to regularly and systematically create prototype arcologies for arbitrary residents in mathematical and structural terms, the aesthetic dimensions of arcological proliferation will be just as important for our architects, our thinkers, our artists, our philosophers, ourselves, and our children. To be rationally moral is not to completely reject that which satisfies us aesthetically, and such an intellectual posture does not require us to live without any forms of luxury in principle. Rather, luxury and the advancement of ecological aesthetics takes on a dimension informed by future studies. How can we, as arcologists, manifest luxury and aesthetic beauty within the context of our ecological urbanism? These future fields of study can be exciting and full of unrealized potential which includes products which exceed in both longevity and quality anything possible in current-day market economies. We can begin to truly balance luxury with real population sizes, experiences and material objects with ecological realities, and we can create new areas of collective focus to manifest our best selves within together. Again, we may start small and focused with a minimal set of agricultural products we know can be effectively grown where a given prototype exists. This minimal set of agricultural products should be informed by the desire and expected dietary range of a given arcological population. Water and paper or hemp products can be among the next most important items to include in a full cycle prototype management system. As I proposed for the Mars colony simulation, an initial deployment intensity calculation may be used to capture the abstract energy and resource intensity of the assemblage itself. Its concrete, metals, prerequisite build-out accounted for, alongside a database describing every feature of the prototype assemblage, literally down to the bolts. While full self-containment is hypothetically possible and potentially desirable, Certain technology, such as computer systems, may be accounted for using, for instance, 90-10 heuristics. That is, allowing 10% of a prototype's operational resources per annum to come from outside the local assemblage. To use a biological analogy, cells are largely self-contained, but they do engage in resource flows with certain inputs as well as outputs as a normal part of cellular metabolism. Once this minimal standard of arcological living has been demonstrated, we can continue to study and experience our arcological lifestyles in an ongoing process of rational self-improvement and arcological proliferation. Instead of irrationally competing against each other via mutual destruction of global resources to maintain our lifestyles, we can enjoy new lifestyles of rational morality inside of beautiful, ecologically optimized environments. We can begin producing more life than we draw down from the environment and become organisms who rationally and morally contribute to the planetary ecology. If you made it this far, I would like to give you my thanks for listening to this presentation. At this point, I will take the opportunity to be direct with you about what comes next. The intellectual work is sound. The ecological necessity is undeniable. Arcosanti, despite its limited cultural success, exists as proof that arcological principles can be realized in practice, and they can be physically manifested. I was Paulo Soleri's last apprentice, and I have spent the years since his passing refining and advancing the theoretical and practical foundations of his life's work. What remains is the will and the resources to advance this work further, to refine prototype specifications, to document and iterate on arcological designs and interactive computer simulations, to build the next generation of ecologically rational communities. If you possess the capacity and the inclination to support this research, I invite you to reach out to me. Throughout history, rigorous thinkers have been sustained by patrons who recognize the value of work that institutions systematically ignore. I am asking for the same. The continuation of this work depends not on institutional validation, but on the direct support of those who understand that humanity's capacity for rational morality and our survival as a species hinges on our willingness to build it. Thank you very much.